European luxury trade with Asia existed for centuries before the Ottoman Turks disrupted it around the year 1400. The Europeans had gotten quite good at moving across a land route or a sea route. They had a basic knowledge of the world that was useful to them. It was very utilitarian. It was very practical. This map from Ptolemy around the year 150 shows the basic knowledge of the world. You yourself ought to be able to pick out the basic geographic features, starting with Spain on the left, Italy on the center left, Arabia directly in the center, moving all the way to Asia on the far right. This map provided useful and basic information. You can also look at the map and see that the Greek geographer Ptolemy understood that the world was round. No one in any world of knowledge thought that the world was flat. Knowing that the world was round was essential to getting back and forth. It helped people understand when the sun rose, when the sun set, how far places were. And so Ptolemy's map of the world provided Europeans with a basic way of moving from point A to point B. But it did have its limitations. Europeans had to navigate by line of sight. They could not go out into the ocean. This map illustrates they had a pretty good understanding of the coastlines of North Africa, Europe, and Asia. But there's nothing on this map about the ocean. Because if Europeans went out into the ocean, they could easily get lost. There were no site markers that they could use to navigate on the ocean. When the Turks disrupted the trade route, the land route, the sea route, Europeans had to learn to go out on the deep seas. They had to learn more about the world. These merchants were capitalists. They wanted to invest at a risk in order to make a profit. Exploration is an incredibly risky and expensive investment. There wasn't much profit in exploration. So European monarchs, like Henry the Navigator from Portugal, subsidized exploration. Subsidies are monetary support from a government. Capitalists love subsidies because subsidies provide an investment with very little risk. It allows the government to take on the risk, and then it allows the merchant to take the profit. Now, obviously, the monarch is going to want something back in return, right? They want a return on their investment. But they're doing that for a house, a family. So it could be generational wealth that they're concerned with, not just a lifetime of wealth. Whereas the capitalist is more concerned with getting profit back, return on investment back in a very short turnaround, yearly, seasonally, and in the modern world, daily. So Prince Henry the Navigator set up a school in Portugal, and his school was able to take advantage of a very unique location. It was located between the North Sea and the Mediterranean. And so they were able to study both North Sea trading and Mediterranean trading. And in the North Sea, they had a shipping technology that had square sails, and in the Mediterranean Sea, they had shipping technology that used triangular sails or lateen sails. What the Portuguese were able to do is put these together in a new type of vessel called a caravel. The caravel had the square sails that took advantage of regular trade winds, usually much stronger, uh, always more predictable, and were able to push, the wind was able to push a much heavier cargo. Whereas in the Mediterranean world, the wind patterns were much more irregular, coming from multiple directions. And so while the lateen sail did not allow as heavy a cargo, the lateen sail had an advantage because it could move nearly into the wind, or with a technique called tacking, so that a skilled sailor can move into the wind in sort of a zigzag fashion and pull the vessel along, because the different speeds of the wind going across a triangular sail. Put these together and you get a replica of a Portuguese caravel that combined both the lateen and the square sails together. And this gave Portuguese merchants the confidence to sail to places that they could not see. It gave them the confidence to move away from the shore, because they had the confidence that they could go back to shore, right? With the trade winds, they could move faster and heavier. With the lateen sails, they had maneuverability. They had the best of both worlds. Prince Henry the Navigator's school also taught merchants how to use both ancient and Islamic technology. So, for example, one of the ancient technologies that they tapped into was a compass. Compass allows someone to find magnetic north. This was a technology known in ancient China. It was known by Muslims and the Islamic world. It was picked up and used by European merchants. So that even without a line of sight, even without a shoreline to see, merchants could know where the shoreline was without seeing it. Once again, giving them confidence to move away from the shoreline, leave the sight of the shoreline behind, and go deeper out into the sea. Arabs, in particular, had developed the use of an astrolabe. This is the device on the right, which looked rather complicated as a mechanism, but you can see that the key feature is around the edge are markings that mark degrees, and in the middle is a way to mark sight. So the way this was used is the merchant at night would pick a star, a fixed star in the sky, and measure the angle where the sky was from the horizon. And with a star chart that had known star locations in known parts of the world, merchants were able to measure known stars from a horizon and then calculate using algebra, right? Another technology that stretches way back, using algebra to calculate where they were on the surface of the earth. So putting these two together, Portuguese merchants knew that they could sail away from the coastline, and the key is to get back to the same coastline, going out farther at sea. So over a series of years, Portuguese merchants explored down the coast of Africa. The Ptolemaic map did not know where the bottom of Africa was, right? It wasn't a concern, because to get from Europe to Asia, all they had to do is stick near go across the Mediterranean, stick near the equator, and either by land or sea could get to Asia and back. With that route closed, they needed to go down around Africa, not knowing where it was. But some explorers also then got confident enough to go out into the ocean and try to figure out, okay, what's out there, but also then knowing where to pull back. And so this is the line you see on the far left with Vasco da Gama in 1497 going out into the Atlantic Ocean, but then turning back and finding the Cape of Good Hope, or the bottom of Africa. And da Gama actually then continued off and around into India. Right? These types of long explorations were very expensive and would not have been possible without government subsidies. But they become profitable because they're able to show that Europeans can get to Asia, pick up luxury items, and bring them back to Europe for sale, right? This is what merchants did. They invested in a voyage, took the risk of the voyage, came back to Europe, sold products for a profit. Christopher Columbus was one of these people who was interested in finding a new route. Now, he made a miscalculation. Christopher Columbus calculated that the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan was 6,600 miles. Now, the ancient Greeks, when they calculated the circumference of the Earth, calculated a much larger Earth than Columbus believed it to be. So the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan would have been 12,000 miles, which is pretty much what it is. But Columbus was convinced that everybody else had miscalculated the circumference of the Earth and that he had a superior skill. And so he recalculated and said, you know, I can get from the Canary Islands to Japan and back with the provision. Even if I make no landfall, I have enough provisions to go across, go west, and get to the east. He shopped this plan around. No European merchant really would take him up on it. No European monarch would take him up on it, because he was the only one claiming that the distance between the Canary Islands to Japan, no one was worried that the Earth was flat and they were going to fall off the edge of the Earth and blah, blah, blah. No. The problem with it is Columbus's calculation was so far off from everybody else's that it just wasn't believable. But he convinced Queen Isabella of the newly emergent Reconquista state of Spain to finance his trip. He was rich enough and secure enough that he was going to take the risk on this project. He was going to subsidize his trip. Now, this imaginary map then, right, of what Columbus was working with in his head looks sort of like this, right? So by the time he leaves, he knows where Europe is. He knows the bottom of Africa, knows where India and Asia are, and that the distance between the Azores, the Canary Islands, islands that merchants had found by going out into sea and exploring, he thought that the distance from them over to Japan was 4,000 kilometers, 660 miles. But there's one glaring mistake in this map. He doesn't know about the Americas, right? So he thinks incorrectly that he can sail from Europe and get to Japan. What also makes it possible is a basic knowledge of current and trade winds. And he gets lucky because there is a set of trade winds that start off the coast of Africa, head across the coast of Africa into what we now know today is the West Indies, and they're called the West Indies because Columbus mistakenly thinks they are the Indies. He's able to ride those trade winds over and those currents over, and then jump on them again and come back into the North Atlantic and arrive back in Europe. Uh, he could have easily gone out, jumped on that trade wind, and jumped on that current in the south, got across, and there were no northern currents and northern trade winds. But lucky for him, he was able to get across and get back. So that by 1508, Europeans had a much more accurate view of the globe. And on this map, you see from 1508, a little bit different than Ptolemaic map on the left because you see all of Africa, right? So down in the bottom right-hand corner of the map is all of Africa. You see Asia, there is Europe right above Africa, but then there's this new thing down in the bottom left of the map, and that is South America. But still, by 1508, right, even though they had a pretty good idea how big South America is, right, because it's pretty big compared to Africa, they were not aware of North America. And so even as late as 1508, people are still convinced that they can go west and get to the east because that's their ultimate goal, right? They're not intending to discover new lands and new civilizations. Their intent for developing this seafaring technology, their intent is to overcome the obstacles and limitations of line of sight travel, overcome the obstacles and limitations of Ptolemaic geography, and find a way to get to Asia. Now, Columbus himself died convinced he had found the Indies, and that's where we've got the term Indians. But others began to understand that this was a whole new place, and these were then called the Americas. This was an accident. This was not intended to happen, right? This was a byproduct of a mistake by Columbus, thinking the world was much smaller than it was. And it was intended to find a luxury trade route from Europe to Asia. And what motivated the development of the seafaring technology was the Ottoman disruption of an ancient trade route from Europe on land and sea. And so European merchants, subsidized by European monarchs, went on voyages of discovery to find a way to Asia and accidentally ran into, discovered the Americas. And they discovered that were already 100 million human beings living in the Americas.